Well, welcome everyone. My name is Tim Kaler. I'm a team member on the Climate Action Plan Task Force for Westborough. I'll be MC Zoom logistics today. I would also say for anyone listening on the broadcast on YouTube, Charter, or Verizon, we have a CAP email address. It's capwestborough, one word, @gmail.com. And you can submit questions via email, and we'll be monitoring that during the presentation as well. So I guess the last thing is we have a link that Westborough TV will kind of be showing on the screen at various points in time to our site on our landing page or our website on the Westborough Town website for the Climate Action Plan Task Force. The presentation today, a copy of it will be posted there, and there's a lot of other information related to the work that we've been doing. So without further ado, I want to introduce the chairman of the Climate Action Plan Task Force, Pete Dunbeck. Pete is also chairman of Sustainable Westborough. And so we're delighted to have him here today to take us through the progress of the Climate Action Plan Task Force. Pete, without further ado.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Tim. Appreciate that. Our objective today is to provide an update on the work of the task force. We formed last February as a result of an article at the town meeting in the fall of 2019, and there's been 11 of us working on this plan. Our goal today is to discuss with the community the update and the progress to date, and to gain feedback from the community both during this meeting and hopefully in an ongoing engagement as we're all moving forward together on this activity. I would also like to acknowledge at the beginning here, Jillian Wilson-Martin, who's the sustainability coordinator from NATIC, who's going to provide some input on the program and her role in the climate action work in NATIC, which has been very helpful to us as we look at other towns and learn from them. So we, as I said, had formed a climate action plan task force starting last spring as the result of a town meeting warrant article. We immediately began looking at other towns and trying to build a framework for what our overarching goals are. And what you see on the screen is what we consider our long-term vision and goal. And that's at the very top line is to do our fair share of implementing Massachusetts's Global Warming Solutions Act and the other goals and programs that are coming from the state. So we're developing a document, a climate action plan for Westborough, getting it approved by March of this year so that we can begin operations next calendar year. We're going to dramatically reduce the greenhouse gas emissions for the community over the next 30 years. But the key decade is the next 10 years up through 2030. So most of our focus is on programs that are in the near term, next 5 to 10 years. Our objective is to, again, match the state goals for a 40% reduction of greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 and an 80% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. But a big note at the bottom is that the state goals are changing, and we'll be discussing that further in the next few slides. The state's goals are getting stricter as the scientific evidence is coming out that the goals that were set 10 years ago are not sufficient to meet the needs of the climate crisis. So in 2008, the Global Warming Solutions Act was passed. This is a piece of legislation which was very forward thinking at the time. It actually became a binding requirement on the state to meet certain emissions. Those emissions were based on a 1990 baseline, a 25% reduction in emissions by 2020, so by this year, which the state has essentially met. And the second requirement was an 80% reduction by 2050. However, the scientific evidence has come out, and the Governor Baker has now reset the goal to a net zero requirement by 2050. That led to a series of analysis by the scientists and experts and academics that support the state in regard to what is a net zero emissions goal, how much emissions can we have, how much sequestration, so forth. So a lot of analysis has been ongoing. This has been within the state government as well as by this Global Warming Solutions Act Implementation Advisory Committee. And we're going to look at some of the work that they have done. The result of that is going to be publishing a clean energy and climate plan, as well as the emission limits for 2030. This plan is going to be published in the next 3 months. So as I said in the previous slide, we are striving to do our fair share and to track the state goals. And the state goals continue to change. They get stricter over time. That's the challenge. The good news is the state is putting a lot of programs in place to support that achievement of that goal. Beyond that, there's even legislation that's still pending in the State House in conference committee. These could potentially even provide new goals and new emission targets for 2030, new reporting structures, new programs. So there's a lot of dynamic at the state level that, as a task force and ongoing as the governance of the plan over time, we're going to need to track. And again, there's a lot of positive news here because these targets come with programs and grant monies and rebates and resources that we can take advantage of to achieve our goal of doing our fair share of this program. As an example, the Implementation Advisory Committee proposed some key metrics, and their key metrics, again, were focused on the next decade because the broad feeling is that the requirements for the next decade are the most critical, that we need to take advantage. We need to really bend the carbon emissions goal in the next 10 years if we're going to avoid the worst of climate change. And just, there's a lot of numbers on this slide. Again, the slides are going to be available on the website immediately after this meeting. But let me highlight a couple of things. One is, as an example of how much change this will require, in order to get energy efficiency and carbon emissions down out of home heating, the state is proposing about 1 million housing units, 1 million households with heat pumps, either ground source or air source heat pumps. That represents 40% of the households in Massachusetts being converted from existing natural gas or oil systems into electric-based heat pump systems. Similarly, on the electric vehicle side, it would be 1 million electric vehicles, and these are residential vehicles as well as smaller trucks, pickup trucks and so forth, light-duty vehicles. The 1 million electric vehicles represents 23% of the light-duty vehicles that are registered in Massachusetts today. So these are dramatic changes in these two segments. And these are key segments that we need to implement change in. As stated earlier, this work is rolling together into a plan at the state level, which is called the Clean Energy and Climate Plan. And there's going to be new emissions targets for 2030, which will be finalized by the state in March of 2021, which is coincident in time with when we are planning to get our climate action plan finalized. One of the first things we did in the task force work was to do an analysis of the greenhouse gas emissions in Westborough. And these are community-wide emissions. We used an international protocol and a tool from the state that allows us to do this in a way that's consistent with other towns in the state, including Natick. the key conclusion we drew was there are four segments, four categories of emissions that represent 83% of our emissions. So these clearly need to be the focus of our effort. The highest emissions from Westborough come from residential vehicles, the cars and trucks that we drive every day. The second and third highest are coming from our commercial and industrial sector. Westborough has a large, Tim, can you mute somebody there? Westborough has a large commercial and industrial sector, and the electricity and building heating from that sector are very significant contributors to our greenhouse gases. Again, this informs the type of programs we need to have. The fourth category, the fourth of the four, is the residential heating, the furnaces and hot water heaters we have in our houses and apartments. So these are the focus areas for our climate action plan. With that information, we've gone through an analysis of what other towns have done, what other programs are available, and have developed a set of goals. And what you see on the left side of this slide is a rough table of contents of where we're going with the climate action plan document. Again, the analysis of greenhouse gas inventory, our methodology for building goals and strategies, the actual meat of the plan, which are the goals and strategies. But also key elements of this is the ongoing work required after the plan is published in governing the plan and ensuring that action is taken, as well as continuing to engage with the community as we're asking people to make changes and gaining insights from the residents who are very knowledgeable and helpful in the process. So we have 10 goals, and underneath those 10 goals, we have a set of strategies which are mapped underneath these goals and how we envision achieving the goals that we've set. The goals are summarized on the next slides, and I'll go through them now. 3 primary goals, and these have been identified as primary goals because they have the greatest direct impact on greenhouse gas reduction. First is to ensure that all of our electricity comes from clean sources. Electricity needs to be supplied by carbon-free emission sources, and the goal, as stated right now, is 40% of the electricity used in the town by 2030, going up to 80% by 2050. As the state announces its new metrics for 2030 and even 2050 with the new net zero target, some of these will probably be tweaked. Excuse me for a second. The last 2 primary goals are in regard to electrification. These are key. It is key for us to electrify our building heating, convert from the use of fossil fuel on site for heating our buildings, and convert our transportation systems, both our personal vehicles as well as mass transit, to electric sources. And the goals are stated here. Again, underneath these high-level goals, we have a series of strategies we plan to implement, and that will all be published in the full plan that we're drafting at this time. On the website that Tim has mentioned, there is more information. There's lists of strategies underneath these goals. So if you have interest in going into more detail, there is some information on the website at this time. And we have 7 other goals. And again, these are important goals, but they're not the ones that have the highest direct energy impact. Energy efficiency is a very important activity, both in the electric sector, how we, converting to LED light bulbs or more efficient motors and compressors and refrigeration systems and so forth. The energy efficiency allows us to lower the cost as we electrify our buildings in particular. So energy efficiency is a key goal. Building energy use disclosure, both for commercial buildings and residential buildings, is a way we can encourage people to make their buildings more efficient, because it increases the impact on resale of the building, because there'll be a consistent way of comparing the efficiency of different buildings. In the transportation sector, in addition to electrifying personal vehicles, we want to encourage as many people as possible to use public transit whenever possible and to lower the amount of vehicle miles traveled. Another way to reduce vehicle miles traveled is in the local space to bike to school, to bike to your work, or walk. We need to do work within town to improve our biking and pedestrian access. Protection of the natural environment and expansion of the natural environment, including planting trees, provides the opportunity to sequester carbon. It also creates a great lifestyle improvement in a place for passive recreation. We have a waste management task force, which is operational under the Board of Health. And it's important for us to reduce our waste, and its contribution, both in the embedded carbon as well as in the emissions that come from how waste is disposed. The final segment I'll mention briefly is off-road equipment and construction, which is one that we're more or less deferring into the next version of the plan. I'd like to emphasize that this climate action plan is a point in time. We plan to have an ongoing revision of the plan over time as we gain experience with the execution of it. We'll get smarter. The state will come out with new program. There'll be new technology. So this is the version 1 of the plan, and we plan to keep it fresh. Critical success factors. Key thing is how we manage the governance of the plan. So we think it's really important that there are clear roles and responsibility within town government to manage this. This includes roles for staff members, potentially even adding a staff member to be the sustainability coordinator, as well as the roles of committees, including Board of Selectmen, School Committee, Sustainable Westborough, and others. We need to engage with the state government, working through our legislative team to understand what's coming, to influence them, to ask for programs that help us achieve the goals, to help the state, and also to look at particular policies such as free market policies that create economic forces to help us to get to a net zero future, while being sensitive to disadvantaged communities in this transition. As we talk about converting, electrifying building heating and transportation, we're changing dramatically the load characteristics of the local electric grid. So one of our ongoing activities is to work with National Grid, meeting annually, having a common understanding of what our plan is and monitoring the implementation so that we ensure that National Grid and the town are evolving together in a successful way. And if National Grid has new programs that can help us in this transition, we want to know about it. Community engagement is key. We need to drive awareness. I mean, we have programs like this we can do, but this is going to need to be done again and again over the years ahead and at a finer granularity level as we bring in new programs like Heat Smart and Solarize Plus and EV charging station programs. We need to encourage ongoing involvement by the community, both to get involved in work on the plan, but also refinement of it and providing new ideas that are beyond what we've already come up with. We'd like to develop a set of climate action plan ambassadors who will volunteer, who could be spokespeople for this effort, as well as have particular skills in a particular subdomain. We plan to have an online presence that allows us to provide educational information on technology, like the ones listed here, and basic glossary of all of this technology, much of which is new to most people. And annually, we're going to report on the progress against the plan to the Board of Selectmen and the community at large to track how we're doing on our greenhouse gas emissions reduction. I would, at this time, like to introduce Jillian again and ask Jillian Wilson-Martin to provide some comments. Jillian has been a good partner for us as we've gotten started. She's introduced us to others in the field and has been very valuable in that. And I appreciate her willingness to come on with us today. Thank you. Jillian?
Thanks for having me, Tim, and thanks to everyone who is on or listening in. I see Westborough TV is joining us. So, I'm the sustainability coordinator in the town of Natick, and I would say that first, I think it's important to note that Natick is working on very similar efforts as Westborough, as are a number of our neighbors. So we're working with over 10 towns in the Metro West region that have very similar climate action goals and have a desire to reduce their emissions by 80 to 100% by 2050, in line with what Governor Baker has identified as a new goal for the state. And a growing number of our communities, a growing number of our communities have a sustainability coordinator or some kind of sustainability position. Some recent ones, Holliston and Sherborne just hired part-time sustainability coordinators, and Framingham has one, Ashland has one. Someone recently told me that I was the grandmother of sustainability in the Metro West area because I was one of the first ones, and I thought, oh, please, I have a 6-year-old, I can't be a grandmother yet. But it has been really exciting to watch the field grow in our area. And I think that's because there's so much need for the work that we're doing, and our state has been such a leader on climate change that they really make a lot of resources available to communities, and it helps a lot to have someone in-house on your municipal staff ready to take on those opportunities as they arise. So here you can see, who I work with. The green stars are some of the state agencies that I work with, and this graphic is kind of the bigger the icon, the more I work with that group, and it changes. This is from last year, and I would say that even now I'm working with maybe more people from the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs, where previously I was working more with the Department of Energy Resources. Most of my time is really spent on climate mitigation and the reducing emissions work that Peter was talking about, but I also do a lot of work on climate adaptation and preparing for what the new projections for precipitation and extreme storm events are going to be in Natick. And I also do a little bit of work as it relates to recycling and composting in those programs. So you see from the breadth of agencies that I work with, there's different focuses for each. In terms of our town, I initially had done a lot of work with our facilities department because I spent so much of my time working on energy efficiency for our public buildings. Natick was a founding member of the Green Communities program, and we've reduced our energy consumption by 20% since we joined. And a lot of that has been by really being very focused on our buildings' energy usage and planning for that in new buildings as well. But I also work with our community and economic development team, our conservation agent. We recently developed new stormwater bylaws that are more in line with the level of development here in Natick. I work with our DPW on our trash and recycling and waste reduction programs. I work with our building department in trying to craft zoning. We passed a solar bylaw a couple of years ago as well. and Natick is a Soul Smart Gold community, which means that in Natick's applications for solar are processed more quickly than maybe they would be in other communities. And we try to take away some of the red tape or soft costs that developers might have in working to install solar. And then more and more, I'm working with residents in Natick because residents are where our emissions really come from. Very similar to Westborough, in Natick, about 60%, a little more than 60% of our emissions actually come from our residents. And so we're working to find ways to partner with them, to encourage them to make changes and support them in that process. So you can get a sense of what I'm doing by who I'm working with. And then of course, in the purple are some of the volunteer and elected boards and committees that I work with. And in many ways, they are involved in an approval process, but also in informing the direction of the issues we're tackling. And in Natick, our sustainability committee has been much more of an advisory committee. So for example, I work on our annual Green Communities report. I identify the projects for energy efficiency work. I lead the RFQ or RFP processes for installing solar or battery storage, and they really provide me some guidance and help when I need it, but they're not leading those initiatives themselves. Next slide, please. And so, you know, I've been, as the grandmother of sustainability, I've talked to quite a few cities and towns who are interested in adding a sustainability coordinator. And actually, when I started, there was a question about my position and if it was adding value. And I don't get that question anymore because I share the slide wherever I go. And the slide is really about showing my performance and the revenue and savings that it generates. So if you look at the slide, the chart in particular, you can see that the very light orange is, the orange parts of the chart are the cost of doing business of the sustainability work that I've been working on. The light orange is my salary. And you can see it's actually shrunk over time, not because I'm just so generous and giving it back, but because I've actually reduced my hours. I started as a full-time position, and being a mother of young children, I asked if I could cut back some. So I work 30 hours a week right now, though there's certainly more than 30 hours a week of work. And maybe I should say I get paid for 30 hours a week. And then the dark orange is the amount of money that I've asked and the town has provided through town meeting appropriations to spend on capital improvements that are focused on sustainability. So for example, investments in retrofitting our streetlights or retrofitting the LED lights in different buildings, things like that. The town has recognized that those projects were worth doing without only getting a grant, and they've appropriated money occasionally for that work. Then everything above that black line after the orange, these are all the net positive results that I'm bringing. And you can see that the dark green, those are savings from energy efficiency projects. The purple is just funds and grants. So that could be a grant to do an energy efficiency project to pay for the cost of doing it, or to do another project that is of interest to the community. So for example, we just were awarded a grant from the MAPC Accelerating Climate Resiliency Program, which we're going to be building a very large community garden that will serve our housing authority and vulnerable populations. And that's something that's seen of as value to the community. And that's something that I led the effort to apply for. The blue area are utility incentives. So in Natick, we have Eversource. I believe you have National Grid. And the utilities, they help to pay for some of these energy efficiency projects. They also are often looking for a partner to pilot programs. And what I found is by having this position in Natick, we're often reached out to because they know that they have someone who could be a liaison for them to test projects. So we get often some kind of special treatment in terms of just piloting things that maybe other communities aren't able to because they don't have a point person for the utility. Then the pink is this textile recovery program. You might have it in Westborough too. We have a pink bag program, and that was something that Natick was, I think, the second community in Massachusetts to do that program, and we were getting some revenue for that. The kind of limeish green is an offsite solar agreement that we have, where there's a system actually that's not located in Natick, but it's located in Waltham, and we are a host customer for it, and we get credits that produce revenue for, or reduce our costs on our utility bills for Natick, and that's reflected there. And then the yellow is reflective of the credits that we received for 2 of the solar arrays that I worked on in Natick, and one at an elementary school and one at our public works building. And we have a few more of those coming online, and actually quite a few other solar projects that I didn't work on directly that were before my time that, you know, just add to that like payback on sustainability that the town has had. They're not just directly to my position. So, you know, and I feel like there's even things that aren't reflected here, because obviously the work that I'm doing is not only about the projects we have grants for, but there's a lot of other things that I'm working on day to day that you can't assign a value for necessarily, but there are things that the community has prioritized as something that they want to work on. But I shared a lot, and I'll stop talking, but I think the final point is, just in 2019 is that the return on sustainability in terms of just what my salary was 12 times that in terms of what the town was getting out of it. So I work really hard in Natick to be, I feel like a revenue center for the town and trying to bring value to Natick. And I live in Natick, and I'm from Natick, and I feel very humbled and honored to have this position, and that there's a real need to be responsible about it. So I do my best to really bring that value back to the town. And thanks for letting me share about it with you.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. Really appreciate your insights. And it's important for us to, as a town, Westborough, to see the potential of a well-run program, and looking forward to continuing our partnership and discussion over time as we venture into this program. Next steps for the Climate Action Plan Task Force. We're going to continue this community outreach and series of meetings. If somebody hearing this would like us to come to one of their meetings, we'd love to continue this outreach. We do have a website, which is shown on the screen. It's also going to be shown on later. Please go visit our website. The slides that are in this presentation, as well as a more detailed presentation, are available right now. We're working with the Master Plan Committee, and we think it's really important that this Climate Action Plan not be a kind of a separate offshoot, but to get integrated into the key governance documents of the town, including the Master Plan. The plan will be a complete draft of the plan is expected in January, and then begin the process of circulation for review and comments with the Board of Selectmen. We're targeting for the Board of Selectmen to approve it in early March of next year, 2021. We would like to, at this time, open the floor for questions and feedback. And again, there is an email on the screen, and I think Westborough TV is putting it on the feed going out publicly. If you're not in the Zoom meeting and you'd like to send us a question, please send it to capwestborough@gmail.com.
And otherwise, you can enter questions in the chat or just raise your hands. There were a couple of questions that came up, Jillian, for you yesterday after we finished that I hoped you might comment on. One was, from your perspective, what are the critical success factors for engaging the community in making the kind of changes that we know are necessary? for residents and businesses to achieve some of these goals. So I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I'm wondering if you know, how that kind of engagement works in Natick, given the time that you've been investing in this.
Yeah, thanks for that question. So I would say that we're still learning a lot about this in Natick. I think we had a really successful solarized program where we had over 150 residents install solar as part of a targeted campaign. And now we have, I think, almost 800 properties in Natick that have solar. And what we learned from that experience was how important it was to for the town to play a role in coaching residents in that process and providing that third party kind of trusted you know, stamp of approval on vendors and the technology, and leading by example, because the town has had solar since 2012. And we're hoping to deploy a kind of similar program as it relates to heat pumps, which, as Tim was talking about, electrification is really very important. And we know that we have limited opportunities to help residents and businesses and the municipality invest in technology that will be appropriate for our long-term goals. So trying to find ways to reach residents when they are, you know, needing to replace a heating system, and how can we be a resource there is something we're working on.
That's great. The other one that came up reminded me, your colleague on the advisory group in Natick, Leo, when Pete and I initially spoke to him earlier this year, we were talking about climate action planning. So I'm wondering, you've done a lot of work for a number of years without having a climate action plan. Where are you in that process? Is that something that Natick is considering, or what are your thoughts around having an organized plan? That's in many ways the same for us. There's been a lot done, but we're taking this move now.
Yeah, we're really excited because we are very much in the same place as you as it relates to our climate action plan. Ours, we're calling it a net zero plan. So there's always, you know, different nomenclature in this, but it's really very much the same idea. And what we plan on doing is releasing a net zero plan, a 5-year plan that would show what foundational changes we think we need to work on over the next 5 years in preparation for this longer term work to 2050. And our goal is to release that this winter, and then to share it and update with our town meeting members. We're a representative town meeting in spring, which would probably be in April is when town meeting meets. And we've been, you know, Pete and you and I have been working on similar things. We've recently participated in this greenhouse gas emissions inventory tool where you shared some of your findings. Natick was privileged to help develop that tool, and we're really excited about it. And there's a phase 2 of that that's going to be coming soon. And really just working with other communities now in our region to see how our actions and plans line up. And I think there's a lot of similarities. So excited to partner on those things.
That's great. Thanks.
So I've done some of these community meetings, and one of the questions that often comes up is, what about these heat pumps? Are they really appropriate for the environment we live in the Northeast? And how effective are they, both technically as well as economically? And I think it is, there's a couple parts that I typically say. One is that there's new technology that's come out in the last few years, and it has improved the performance of heat pumps to a lower temperature. I totally get the idea that it's always going to be a consumer decision where the cost is going to be a key factor and the economics has to work for you as a homeowner. Every home is different. So we hope to play the role that Jillian was just describing of being a trusted advisor, where we can pull together information from the state, from other sources, potentially pull together qualified vendors so that residents can make a decision with confidence. The other point I'd say on heat pumps is it's a decision you pretty much need to make in advance. You can't wait until your furnace goes out and then in the middle of the winter try to figure out if it's time to buy a heat pump. Because if you're without heat in the middle of the winter, you're gonna go with what you got. You're gonna get a better replacement. But so it's important to do the analysis and have a plan for the replacement in advance.
Okay, good. We had a question. I see colleagues Peter Flynn and Sharad Mehta on the line as well. We had a question come in about clean electricity from the broadcast, and it was, how can Westborough control or influence the degree of clean energy used to generate grid supplied electricity? What is it? You know, it's sort of like, what can we do? And there was a follow-up to that too, but I'll let one of you take that.
Yeah, Peter, you're the chair of our working group on electricity. Maybe you could address that.
Sure. There are actually a few things that Westborough can do. One is it can participate in existing programs at the state level. The state operates 2 programs that are designed to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by displacing sources of electricity today use fossil fuel with sources that use solar technologies. One is called the SMART program. SMART is an acronym for Solarized Massachusetts Renewable Target. And it actually provides incentives for the installation of solar facilities. These are facilities that people can install themselves on their property or participate by buying power from a solar facility that someone else builds, typically a developer, and is looking to market the power. And again, that's incentivized through payments from the state. The other is called the Solarized Massachusetts Plus program, which communities at the grassroots level organize, and through their collective buying power are able to negotiate better prices from solar developers and sellers of solar electricity than an individual homeowner would be able to get on their own. So those are both programs that are up and running and that are available, in which Westborough people in Westborough can participate. There's also the Westborough Power Choice program that exists today. And if you're not aware of it, it's a program in which the town has negotiated a contract with a supplier of electricity. And included in that are 2 options that are good from an environmental perspective. One provides carbon-free renewable electricity at 36% of the total, which is more than what is average across the state. And so just by participating in that program through the standard default option, you're buying electricity that's cleaner than what is typically being generated and used across the state. That program also has a 100% renewable option. That's a little bit more expensive, but that people can participate in. So those are just 2 examples of the types of programs that are available today that Westborough businesses and residents can participate in that would help move us towards using cleaner sources of electricity for the power we use in town today.
That's great. Thank you. The viewer sort of tagged on at the end too, whether the state is, the word here was supporting the idea of clean nuclear energy as a technology in the future to supply decarbon electricity. So I've heard that before. I don't know what the answer is. Can you help us with that?
Yeah, if by support you mean would nuclear power count towards the goals that the state has established for clean electricity, the answer is yes.
Okay.
However, unlike solar, there are no incentives available from the state. Okay. So it's supported and direction, but not with money.
Got you.
And just to follow up on Peter's, there is a set of goals in regard to the clean energy standard, which is what Peter was referring to. And then within that, there's a component which is renewable energy, which has a different definition, which includes, it's a narrower definition, which includes solar and wind. But yes, nuclear does count in the clean energy standard. And but the kind of the political likelihood of building new nuclear or bringing new nuclear power into Massachusetts, I think, is pretty slim. But if the nuclear that's available and the large hydro that's available does count on the clean energy requirements for the state. Any other questions you see on the line there?
There was another one. Our colleague Sharad, I know, is electric vehicles are close to his heart. He's done a terrific amount of good work. If you haven't seen his presentation, I know there'll be a way to view that through the website. But we had a question, Sharad, from someone, which is how can we persuade the average person to buy an electric vehicle when they are more expensive than gas vehicles? So I've asked you a little bit about that before. That may be a little bit of a misnomer. They may not be looking at all the economics, but what would you say to folks as we look at the aggressive goals for purchasing electric vehicles?
So thank you for asking the question. What I wanted to say is when you look at an electric vehicle versus a gasoline vehicle, it is true that today the cost of ownership of an electric vehicle is more than that of gasoline. But if you work out all of the costing, and we have done that a few different times. I did it when I bought my own electric vehicles, and I did it when we were buying a vehicle for my wife. And really, the maintenance cost, the fuel cost, and the total cost of ownership is actually not as high as most people would think. And I do have a detailed presentation where I have worked out those numbers, and I'll be happy to present it to any group that may be interested in it. So it's really not as expensive as it seems, because if you just look at the price tag of the car and decide, that's not that does not give you the total picture. One of the small factoids that I'll share with you is that the number of components that go into an electric vehicle is about a third of the number of components that go into a regular gasoline car. And just the reliability, from a reliability point of view, if you just look at that, electric vehicles are expected to be way more reliable as compared to gasoline cars, just because there are fewer number of parts. The other piece is that the batteries are the largest component of the cost, and their prices are coming down rapidly because it is such an active field of research. And so it's really, like I said, I'll be happy to put a presentation to show how the numbers stack up in terms of the total cost of ownership and the benefits of electric vehicle, not only in greenhouse gas emissions, but in many other ways.
There's a lot of other benefits, and like so many of the changes, we really need to look at things on a total cost of ownership basis.
That's right.
It's just the original purchase price. And I know we see that equation with heat pumps and some other technology as well.
That's true. That's true.
Great. Thank you,
I
Sharad.
see Natalie has her hand raised. Would you like to unmute Natalie and ask a question?
Yes.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. I just had a question about transportation and I know that there is some talk from the state about reducing public transit due to the COVID pandemic, and I was wondering if there's been any discussion about how to move forward with that after the pandemic.
I know I've heard the same thing, Natalie, and I'll have to let one of our experts, Pete, do you have?
Let me make sure I understand the question. So there's a component of it is whether we expect the post-COVID use of public transportation to return to the normal levels. I think that's part of the question. And then was there more to it than that?
Well, I know that there's that, but also I know there's talks of cutting, the amount of times the T is running and things like
Okay.
that, and kind of how the town is going to push maybe against that after the pandemic
Yes.
is over.
Okay, I got it. It is, yeah, as ridership dropped, the MBTA and other transit systems have economic problems, and they're reducing service. That does cause great concern because use of the public transportation, particularly for commuting, depends on sufficient frequency that it's available when you need it. So we are concerned about that. We will encourage use of public transportation and adoption, of greater frequency. And unfortunately, it's going against the tide at this point because the budget cuts in response to the lost ridership. Kind of a component of what you were asking was what is our plan in regard to advocating for that? In general, we are advocating for more public transportation. There is a local bus system that we're trialing in Westborough called VIA, which is a point-to-point bus service with a phone app where you can call for service. It's an experimental. I think it's very important that we continue to get the word out on that. I think that has an opportunity to be very beneficial, as well as using that as a feeder to get to the train station. So I think it's important that we continue to support public transportation, and unfortunately, there's a huge drop-off in ridership, and that's causing some economic problems for the transit systems.
So there was a question, Pete, thank you for that. Does that answer some of your question, Natalie? Probably not the best news for us, but part of, I think, managing forward is to deal with the dynamics of all of the changes, right? And try to work with them.
Right, thank you.
So the question
Just add to that, if that's okay, I would just like to add that, what I've witnessed in the pandemic and following the local budget cuts here in Natick, and I followed them really closely because my child's school was at risk of closing because of the gap in the budget. And what I see our municipal leaders doing with state legislators is really advocating for just more local aid, right? That seems to be their big ask all the time. And I think it's important for this community to be asking our select boards and local elected officials and town administrators or town managers, what have you, to really be making sure the state is also investing in regional transit and public transit, especially because I don't get the sense that our state is getting letters of support for the MBTA and commuter rail from our select board in Natick and other places. So I think that's an important strategy for us to keep top of mind.
to advocate for at the state level, yeah, and with those agencies.
Yeah.
That's good. The question I missed, I think, came partly between your remarks, Jillian, and Pete's. And that's Donna on our Zoom call. She says we've been researching heating systems with an eye to replacing or upgrading our system in the spring, but we could use some guidance. And I think she's referring to the notion of coaches. And I know, Pete, we've talked about ambassadors, but Jillian, in putting this consortium or communities together, I had heard through Pete that you were talking about, coaches for individual homeowners. And as somebody that owns an old home, I know rather than listening to a contractor per se, having information from a neutral party in town about how to evaluate the economics of that move and what my options might be would be incredibly valuable. So Donna's asking about that and almost, like when we could bring that online in the plan. So that's my work group. So I know that's, Donna, it's a strategy that we intend to pursue. We don't have a timeline for implementing it right now, but I'm curious to know what's been done in Natick in that regard. Maybe we can borrow your
Well,
tea leaves.
well, we're looking to borrow some coaches too. So I think there's a real need for coaches. And I know that in Newton, they were actually recently successful in getting, I believe it was Eversource, their utility to pay for a paid position for, they call it an energy coach. And what I will say is, why we don't have a program like that running in Natick yet, we do have a resident who is part of something called the Heat Smart Alliance. And it's basically this group of individuals who are essentially those kinds of coaches. And I think it was Donna who asked that if you want to reach out to me or reach through your committee, I'd be happy to share some contact information with that team, because I'm sure they would be interested in coaching you from afar. They're very dedicated to helping people make the transition and explore things and understand the cost benefits of what is possible for them.
I think that's very helpful, Jillian. Thank you. And you can send that to me or to the CAP.
I just want to add, I have actually, we recently switched to a heat pump, and I actually have been researching it for about a year. And so I do have some information and also that I'd be happy to share. Again, it's there's a lot of nuances and details there, but overall, I think the technology is economically viable, and it actually is at a place where it would make sense to switch from a fossil fuel and other sources to heat pump. Now, one of the questions is, if you have natural gas, the economics is a little bit different. But if not, if you have like furnace or other sources of heating, then the economic case is much more viable to me.
Thank you.
In regard to kind of the general answer to your question, Donna, is we're focused very much on getting the plan in place, and we don't expect to be fully operational with the information resources that you're suggesting in the spring, as your written question had asked. But we're rolling up our sleeves and we're working on it. So one-off requests, we will keep trying to build it out, and with help from our neighbors and friends and other communities, we're going to leverage whatever resources we can. But the website and the ambassador program and stuff is not going to be in place in the spring. So I don't want to leave any expectation that we're going to be fully operational in the spring.
Thank you.
I did want to, we've mentioned Sharad and Peter, and also mentioned Annie Konensberg, who's another member of our task force who's on this call. And kind of maybe wrap up with a thank you to all of the task force members for their hard work in getting us to this point. If there are any other questions, we can entertain them. Otherwise, we'll wrap up here.
Nothing at this time, Pete, online. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And thank you again, Jillian, for coming and giving us the wonderful support. And we look forward to continuing to work with you and the others in the Metro West collaborative effort.
Good
Thank
evening,
you.
everyone.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Good night.